Well, good afternoon everyone. Welcome to the Vines Community Church, whether you're here in person or watching online. We're a community of believers who love God, we love people, and we're growing together. One of the favourite topics, of course, suffering. Everyone loves that one. Pretty keen, if I could, I'd be wiping that one out from the Bible, but there it is. Okay, so the suffering servant, or subtitle, God's righteous servant who suffered. Isaiah 53 is often seen as the suffering servant prophecy. At the time this prophecy was given, people would not have known who this was about because they didn't look forward in time. We can't go backward. We can't go forward either. And they couldn't see Jesus. So some may believe that it was about a Messiah, but not the Messiah that they were looking for, and not the Messiah that we know in the person of Jesus. Some people say that the Jews have forbidden reading of Isaiah 53 because it proves that Jesus is the Messiah, and that's simply not true. They haven't banned the reading or forbidden the reading of Isaiah 53 at all. All Jewish people are free to read and study Isaiah 53 because it's part of the Jewish Bible. It's not going to change. It isn't included in the weekly readings of specific passages from the prophets, but then quite a few passages aren't included in those readings. Most followers of Judaism actually believe that Isaiah 53 refers to the nation of Israel, not a Messiah. And so that's a big difference between Jewish religion of Judaism and Christianity. Is we believe Isaiah 53 is about Jesus, the Messiah, who came. Whereas most of the followers of Judaism believe that the suffering servant in Isaiah 53 is actually Israel itself. Now, for those who didn't realise, the Jews have had, or the nation of Israel has had several messiahs. They've had several people who rescued their nation and helped them re-establish themselves, because that's what the Messiah was meant to do. So we can look back and see how Jesus fulfilled the prophecy of the Messiah and many other prophecies, not just Isaiah 53, and we can see how the New Testament writers understood that Isaiah 53 pointed to Jesus. We see Jesus as the Messiah. We know that Jesus fulfilled the prophecies about the Messiah in their fullness, in the spiritual realm, and ultimately he will also fulfill them in the physical realm. Jesus is returning and he will establish his kingdom on earth. We understand that Jesus set us free from the oppression of sin and death. So Jesus is the Messiah. We believe Jesus is the Messiah that was prophesied back in what we call the Old Testament. The Jews are still waiting for their Messiah. Jesus, from the Jews' perspective, didn't meet the requirements of the Messiah because he didn't free Israel from the oppression of Rome. So, their understanding of the biblical, or our Bible, is different, or their Jewish Bible is different to our understanding. Does everyone... We've got two separate religions. Judaism and Christianity are not the same. And there is a very big dividing point on who is the Messiah. Everyone understand that okay? Yep. So Isaiah 53, from our perspective, we see the suffering servant as Jesus who came to pay the penalty that we should have been getting to enable us to be restored in the right relationship with God again. And so, what I'll be talking about is what Jesus did at the cross. What Isaiah 53 talks about as what the suffering servant would go through. So you'll notice I've given the message, the title, subtitle. In your Bibles, you'll see that a lot of chapters, or even smaller sections within the chapters of the Bible, have headings. I did see someone who was trying to, for those who are familiar with the word, exegete a heading on the Bible. I imagine Adam would find that very entertaining, because the headings are not actually biblical scriptures. They are the things that people have put in place to describe what's coming. And so what we see in a few different translations, it's A little bit harder to see. The New King James Version does not have a chapter heading. Quite a few others do not have a chapter heading for Isaiah 53. The NASB, New American Standard Bible, 1995, does have a chapter heading. The chapter heading from NASB is The Suffering Servant. There are other ones. So, what is... we're starting from verse 2. By his knowledge, the righteous one, my servant, shall justify the many. That's what the NASB... So for those who don't know, NASB, New American Standard Bible. This one, NKJV. Anyone get a guess at that one? New King James Version. Fantastic. So I'll use different variations or translations of the Bible, and I will always put them up there so you can look at what translation I'm using. I won't always use the same one. Normally, I use the New King James, but I've been reading through that NASB, and I like some of the things that it says in there too, the way it does it. So the NASB says, by his knowledge, the righteous one, my servant, will justify many. The New King James says, by his knowledge, my righteous servant shall justify many. So, slight variation means the same thing. This is important because it was believed that a righteous person was blessed and didn't suffer. A person who suffered, that suffering was seen as the result of sin. So if you were going through a hard time in your life, if you got sick, if something bad happened, like Job, and all your family got killed, and all your cattle and everything like that got wiped out, and all your houses were destroyed, it was obvious you had sin, and that's why that was happening to you. And so it's important to set that foundation that in Isaiah 53, all the bad things that are described that happened to Jesus, a lot of people when they read it would say it's because of sin. Whereas Isaiah 53 clearly says that the suffering servant was the righteous servant. He had right standing before God, and what happened to him was not the result of his sin, and as we'll go through and see it, it was the result of our sin. Jesus suffered for what we did, not him. Are we okay with that foundation? Yep. So, just to help understand that, in John chapter 9 it says, and his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? The guy that Jesus met was born blind. They automatically assumed either he had sinned or his parents had sinned. And Jesus, of course, said, neither. You're completely wrong about that idea. So there was the assumption that the man himself or his parents would have sinned in order for him to be born blind. But Jesus heals the man, and the Pharisees interrogate him. John chapter 9, fascinating read. The guy is incredibly sarcastic. He's got great comebacks to his interrogation, a little bit of humour. Of course, it ends up that he gets kicked out of the synagogue, which wasn't a good thing back then. It's a severe punishment because you're actually cut off from the whole of your community. And so the Pharisees, after this guy's very witty answers, says this, and they answered and said to him, you were completely born in sins, and you are teaching us. And they cast him out. Thankfully, the man meets Jesus again, or Jesus finds him, and he gets to know who Jesus is, and he can join a new community. But, again, at that time, if you were suffering, it was because of sin. If you seemed to be living a good life with lots of blessing, you were blessed because you had right standing with God. And some of us in churches, we still do the same thing. We see somebody who seems to have it all working well for them, and we just assume that God is blessing them because they must be living a good spiritual life. And when somebody has things happen to them that go wrong, we make the assumption there must be sin in their life. How many people have seen pastors and big international speakers, praying for people and healing and operating in all these gifts, and we assume that somehow they're more spiritual or they're closer to God because they operate in these gifts, and that's a lie. It's not true. You are as spiritual as anybody else standing here. Every one of you is as spiritual as me. You are a spirit, and you can't get more spiritual than that. Oftentimes people, they might work in gifts, but that doesn't mean they have a good relationship with God. We can't judge what a person does, or we can't judge what relationship a person has with Jesus by what kind of ministry they have. We can't judge what kind of life a person is living in connection with Jesus just because things are going wrong for them. And if they're going right, we don't assume that they're doing the right thing. Does that make sense? Are we all okay with that? Okay. When you go through Isaiah 53, we see the suffering experienced. It would be natural for the reader to assume that the suffering was the result of their wrongdoing. Isaiah 53 clearly states that the suffering experienced was due to our wrongdoing, not the sufferers. So I'm not going to go through every verse in Isaiah 53. We'll get through quite a few. Just to clarify from my perspective, I believe it's the perspective of every believer, or it should be, this chapter is talking about Jesus. Okay, everyone, this Isaiah 53, can we all say, yes, it's talking about Jesus? Didn't put your hand up. I'll talk to you about that later. Okay, so verse 2. For he, that is Jesus, grew up before him, that's the Father, like a tender shoot and like a root out of parched ground. So it's basically hinting at the rejection of Jesus by Israel. Israel rejected Jesus as the Messiah, and so this is hinting at it. He has no stately form or majesty that we should look upon him, nor appearance that we should be attracted to him. Jesus was not a good-looking man, and he didn't have a bearing that people would be drawn to him. There was nothing physically about him that would draw people to him. If we have a look at some of these pictures of Jesus, of who play Jesus, how many of them fit in with the non-attractive Jesus image? I mean, I might even get a man crush on some of them. That's just ridiculous. Okay? He did not have an appearance that we should be attracted to him. That's not an unattractive appearance. So Martin Luther King Jr., though, gave a speech called I Have a Dream. Anyone heard of Martin Luther's I Have a Dream speech? And part of it, he says these words: I have a dream that my 4 children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the colour of their skin, but by the content of their character. And that's a noble dream, but I think we've been judging people by their outer appearances for a long time. Whether we like to admit it or not, a more physically attractive person is seen as more trustworthy than one who is less physically attractive. Has anyone recognised that? Seen some people go through life because of their looks, they get it a lot easier than other people who are not as good looking. Studies have shown it takes around 1/10 of a second for people to make a judgment about a person's characteristics like trustworthy and competence. When we first meet someone, we judge that person by their appearance to see whether or not they are trustworthy or competent. 1/10 of a second. What are we judging that on? We're judging it on their appearance. And some people will say it's more likely a male trait to judge a person by their appearance. Men judge a woman's character by her beauty. But I've got to ask, how many women are attracted to men who have turned out to be serial killers? To make a snap judgment about whether they can trust them based on their appearances, and they're wrong. Jesus did not have an appearance that would have drawn people to him or led them to judge him trustworthy or competent at first meetings. Anyone ever thought about Jesus like that? I don't know. Sometimes we forget about the humanity of Jesus. Yes, he is 100% God, but he's also 100% man. He just didn't happen to be a particularly attractive man, unlike the pictures. He was despised and forsaken of man, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And like one from whom men hide their face, he was despised and we did not esteem him. Jesus suffered sorrow, he suffered rejection, he was acquainted with grief. And this wasn't just at his death, this was all through his life. Jesus was born to a woman who was pregnant with him before she was married. In that culture, do you think Mary, Joseph and Jesus didn't suffer in the community? They were going to suffer because Mary was pregnant before her and Joseph had been married. There was a stigma attached to them because of that. And maybe that today people don't care about it, but back then, the same was more than frowned on. So one thing I'd like to say about that is that despite the rejection, the sorrow and the grief, Jesus did not let it define him. He kept what happened to him separate from his sense of who he was. Jesus was never a victim, and we don't have to be victims either. We have some stuff thrown at us in life, and often we do. And sometimes it is terrible what gets thrown at us, but we don't have to be victims of our circumstances. We can choose what attitudes and actions we take, no matter what life throws at us. And it will take effort to make those choices. It will take time to learn to make those choices, but we can do it because we are not alone. Jesus Christ, the one who has been through it all, dwells in our hearts, and the Holy Spirit will empower us to make those choices as we surrender to him. Let's move on to verse 4. Surely our griefs he himself bore, and our sorrows he carried. He carried our griefs and our sorrows. Griefs. The word griefs, it means sickness, illness, disease, and affliction. Sorrows, it means pain, suffering. And that pain and suffering is physical, mental, and emotional. And sometimes we try to carry them on our own. Sometimes we try to carry our sicknesses, illnesses, diseases, and afflictions on our own. Sometimes we try to carry our pain and sufferings, whether it's emotional, mental, or physical, on our own. But we don't have to, because Jesus has already carried them for us. Are we casting all our cares upon him, or are we struggling to carry the things that Jesus has already carried for us? It doesn't mean we won't go through sickness, disease, affliction, and pain and suffering. Of course we will. Life can be absolutely terrible at times, but when we go through them, we can go through them remembering that Jesus has already carried them. We can go through them knowing that Jesus has already been there before us. We can go through them knowing that we are not alone in the midst of it, and there is a way through it. See, those things don't have to dictate how we act in the midst of them. We are not victims of our circumstances, and they don't define our character. Yet we ourselves, verse 4b, esteemed him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. We saw Jesus being touched by God with a forceful beating that oppressed him. Because of that belief, because of the belief that it was only the unrighteous who were punished by God, when Jesus suffered, it was thought he must be unrighteous. But Jesus was being smitten and afflicted because of our unrighteousness, not his. He is the Father's righteous servant. And it's important not to judge too quickly. We see somebody going through something hard, it doesn't mean they've done something to get there. I know the Pharisees, when they looked at Jesus on the cross, they mocked him and said he must have done something wrong to get up there. It's important not to judge too quickly. Some examples of judging too quickly. Come on.
Mom was asking, well, that's a lot of money for a debt. Well, I hate to tell you this, but you're getting robbed. Did you hear me? You're getting robbed.
It's important not to judge too quickly, because sometimes we're going to get the wrong message. And we do judge people quickly within a tenth of a second about what kind of person they are. And we shouldn't. We judge very quickly. When Jesus was on the cross and going through the suffering, it's very easy to say he must have done something wrong. When we see people going through a rough time, it's very easy to say they must have done something wrong. Let's not judge people too quickly. But he was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastening of our well-being fell upon him, and by his scourging we are healed. We see these references to the suffering Jesus went through on the cross, and before it, pierced through with nails, crushed under the weight of the cross, being flogged, being punished by beatings with fists and rods. Jesus went through it all for our rebellion. He went through it for our guilt. He went through it for our healing, our wholeness and restoration of relationship with God. He went through it so we could have peace with God, wholeness and unity with him. Jesus did not go through it because of his sin, guilt or rebellion. He didn't have any of those things. He went through it as punishment for ours. He suffered what we deserved. Just in case we weren't sure, the prophet clarifies it in the next verse. All we like sheep have gone astray. Each one of us has turned to his own way. I don't know if this reminds anybody of themselves. All we like sheep have gone astray. Each one has turned to his own way. But even though it was us who did it wrong, the Lord caused the iniquity, the guilt of us all to fall on him. Jesus was innocent, he was righteous, he was sinless, and yet the guilt for all our sin and rebellion was laid on him. He paid the price for what we did wrong. Jesus was the only one in history truly undeserving of any punishment. But the Lord was pleased to crush him, putting him to grief, if it would render himself as a guilt offering. It pleased God the Father to see his Son, Jesus Christ, crushed and put to grief as a guilt offering for us. It pleased the Father. It pleased the Lord. How? How could crushing his Son and putting him to grief be pleasing to the Father? Quite a few years ago, I worked at the same school my son attended. Tanya and I only had one car at the time, and so Caleb and I had to walk home from school. The other girls had left school by then. My son was in around year 1 or 2 at the time, and we had to walk up a hill to get home. He struggled to walk that far. And also, on top of that, sometimes I would do some shopping. So this is what I would do. I would put my work backpack on me. I'd make sure Caleb's backpack was on him. I'd put him on my shoulders. Then I'd pick up the shopping and I'd walk up the hill. And by the time I got home, I was tired. I was sore. I was physically suffering. But it pleased me to do it. It pleased me to put myself in that painful situation because of what it meant for Caleb. It pleased the Father and it pleased the Son for the Son to be crushed and put to grief because of what it meant for us, because of what it meant for the restoration of the relationship between us and God. Jesus endured the cross for the joy that was set before him. It pleased him because of the restoration of relationship we would go through. And continues on to verse 11. As a result of the anguish of his soul, he will see it, that is, God the Father. As the result of the anguish of Jesus' soul, the Father will see it and be satisfied. By his knowledge, the righteous one, my servant, will justify the many, as he will bear their iniquities. God the Father sees the anguish, the labour, the works, the sorrow of Jesus' soul, and he is satisfied with that. He doesn't demand any anguish, labour, work or sorrow from us. What Jesus did was more than enough payment for our rebellion, our sin and our wrongdoing. Jesus chose to go to the cross knowing that he would suffer and die for all of our sins, knowing that he would become sin, even though he never knew sin. He had the knowledge of what was to come, and still he chose to pay the debt that we incurred through our pride, rebellion and disobedience. In doing so, Jesus carried our guilt and he bore the blame on our behalf. He was punished for what we did. And through Jesus' suffering, we are made innocent. God declares that we are not guilty, and we are given right standing of God himself in Christ. This is the grace of God that we enter into through faith. And most of us have heard this before, but how does it change our lives? I'm going to share one way I think it should. So let's just say I was talking to Adam, and I said to Adam, your green hair looks stupid. You look like a woke liberal. Adam, do you have green hair? No. Are you offended that I don't like the green hair you don't have? Why would you be? You don't have it. How can you be offended? Since you don't have green hair, do you look like a woke liberal? I don't think you do. If Adam had green hair, then perhaps he would be insulted and be upset with me, and perhaps consider that me thinking he looked like a woke liberal to be fighting words. But he doesn't have green hair. He doesn't look like a woke liberal, and the words don't mean a thing to him because he knows they're not true. But what if he thought they were true? What if he really believed that he had green hair and looked like a woke liberal, even though he doesn't have green hair and doesn't look like a woke liberal? When I said that his green hair looked stupid, if he actually cared about my opinion, which I don't think he does, then it could be very upsetting for him. But this is one of the ways that the enemy works in us. He accuses us of guilt and he brings condemnation. He brings fear that God is angry with us and has rejected us. He tells us we're suffering because of our sin. He tells us we haven't worked hard enough to satisfy God. He tells us we don't know enough. He tells us we need to do this or that to enter into God's fullness. He lies, and he's very good at it. The problem, though, is with us. It rests with us because there's something in us that accepts and believes the accusations. We come into agreement with the accusations. Isaiah 53 has been very clear to tell us that Jesus Christ was the one who did all the work. Jesus Christ's labour was enough to satisfy God. His knowledge was enough to justify us. And yet when the enemy comes and says we're not good enough, he makes us work harder. If we really knew the truth, then the accusations would roll off us without impact. If they land and we get upset and angry about it, it means we're not living in the full truth of what Isaiah 53 means for us. Now, I can't change that in you, and I can't change it in me, but God can. He is the one who can make the truth of Isaiah 53 come alive inside of us. And it might mean reading through Isaiah 53 a few times and taking the time to think about it. But most of all, it will involve us recognising when we're accepting lies that contradict the truth of Isaiah 53. It means coming to God in surrender and allowing him to work in us. And then we choose to walk in the work that he does. The truth is, we will have trouble in this world. We will suffer. We will go through pain, but we are not alone in it. And it also doesn't mean that we've done anything wrong. I mean, sometimes we make bad choices, so that happens, but not always. We need to see God on that and find out. And I want to finish with this thought. Jesus was the righteous servant of God, and he was the one that suffered. But he was not the servant of man. His death was an incredible service. He did an incredible service to man through his death, but he was not the servant of man. He was only the servant of God. And we are also servants of God. In serving God, we may provide a service to others, but we are not their servants. We are not the servants of people or circumstances. We are not victims. We have the power to choose what we do. And that's a really important thing. I know, particularly in the movement I grew up in, it was we have to be servant leaders. We have to serve one another. And yes, there is serving that we do, but we're serving God, not man. He is the one who tells us what to do, and we obey him. And sometimes it means saying no to other people. And we can do that. We don't have to be victims. We have the power to choose what we do. And Jesus chose to suffer. He chose to go to the cross, and he chose to die. He chose the will of the Father. He chose to become a guilt offering for us. He chose to do what was necessary to free us from the slavery and oppression of sin and death. After reading through Isaiah 53, I think we need to start changing our words. Because so often we say, oh, I have to do this and I have to do that. When we say those words, we're becoming a victim to those circumstances and those actions. And you know what? I don't have to do something, but I can choose to do it. When I choose to do it, it means I'm not a victim. I am one of those that Christ suffered for, and I will begin to live like it.